Welcome to the first ever Benoy's Breakdown. I'm Jeremy Niagara. This is Coach Scott Benoy. Coach, how are we doing tonight?
We're good. How are you?
I'm excellent. So this may look a little different because it's me and Coach Benoy talking basketball instead of me and Coach Kiefer talking football. But we've had such a good response to doing Kiefer's Corner that I was asked, hey, do you think you can do a basketball one? And of course the scheduling is always kind of a thing in basketball. It's a long season, play lots of games. But we're going to try to do this weekly. Maybe we'll end up missing a week or two or whatever. But this is the first episode one night before the season opener.
Yeah.
So this will be season opener number 30. How many for you?
Well, I'll tell you what. It's a lot of season openers. Let's just put it that way. I think in terms of my career here at Baldwin, there was 23 years before I took a little step down. So this would probably be like 27.
So this is 27?
I think it is. Yeah.
Okay. And we'll start with a non-conference game, home, against Turtle Lake tomorrow night.
Yeah, and I think that there's always a lot of excitement when you start a season, particularly when you get to open up at home. And based on what I have seen in the last 2 weeks, how we scrimmaged, I'm excited about getting it going again because I think our guys, you get this point in practice where even though it hasn't been months, they're a little tired looking at each other, and It's nice to get some new bodies.
Absolutely. So, looking at last year, looking at the year before, there's a lot of guys that have graduated since the sectional final team 2 seasons ago. In fact, Colin, I think, would be the only one that has experience.
Correct. Evan was part of that team, but really not on the floor that year.
So when we look at the 2023-2024 version of this team, who are we expecting to see on the floor tomorrow night?
Well, I think right now, when you look at the nucleus of guys that we have, I've commented whether it's for the yearbook or for our local paper. When asked about our strengths, I think it really revolves around those 3 returners that have logged the most minutes at the varsity level. You have Colin Fritz, who's beginning his 4th year as a varsity player. Evan Clausen, who was on our team as a 9th grader, felt that sectional final experience as someone that was a reserve, now has stepped into that role as a starter, and I think he's ready to have a breakout year. And then James Borkart, who's another kid that was on that team a couple years ago, but battled a lot of injuries when he was a sophomore. Kind of came out of his shell last year and has worked really hard to, I think, become a key player on this year's team. And then in addition to those, 3 solid returners, Maddox Mahoney, Brody Paul, have had really outstanding summers and did a nice job in fall league. You have Jeremy Jacobson, who has worked very hard, who's another junior. And then Ryan Wienendahl, another kid that experienced some injury last year, but at least he has varsity experience.
Right.
Cal Smith, who will ultimately get healthy down the road for us. Really, that's kind of our mix of guys right now that we look at being kind of our top 7, potentially 8, depending on what happens with some of our younger guys. But that's really the nucleus of our club right there.
So when you talked about the core 3, the thing that sticks out for me with those 3 is the size of those 3.
Yeah.
So you lose Eli, who was a large human.
Mm-hmm.
You lose Sean Zomeren, who was a big kid with lots of leaping ability, played high.
Yep.
And now you talk about Colin Fritz, who's a 6'3" and just a big
Very
kid.
put together, correct.
Evan Clausen is I saw him walk by today. He's got to be 6'4" and still growing if he's not taller than 6'4".
Yeah, I think Evan, we list him at 6'5". And when you have 2 guards with James and Evan that are both 6'5", a kid like Colin, who is, like as you alluded to, a big, strong kid. You throw in Brody Paul at 6'7",
who's a very tall.
Maddox Mahoney at 6'3", who can play above the rim.
Right.
Size is not the problem for us right now. And I think one of the things that is important for us to take a step this year is there's a big difference, in my opinion, about having a size advantage and having a size difference.
Right.
And a size difference is me being bigger but not utilizing that advantage when I need to.
Right.
And we're really being intentional this year, at least early in practice, about having a size advantage, because that is, even though we live in an era where there's a lot of emphasis on the 3-point line and perimeter shooting, I watch a lot of college basketball. One of the things that was very, very evident in some high-profile games over the holiday break was teams that were excelling in the paint were winning ball games. And that's been our message to our guys really since day one, is we are big, particularly on the perimeter, and so let's utilize the gift that we have, and that's being bigger than most of our opponents.
Right. So that's going to be, I mean, you talk about the advantage, that's going to help in the rebounding game, right? That's going to help defensively, just the length. It's going to help impact shot taking for the other team. One of the big things I think for high school teams to be successful is ball handling, right? Ball handling, how you defend the perimeter. Now, when you have bigger guys, typically you're giving up some speed, some quickness, right? So how will we be, and you've, I mean, from day one, a long time ago, it was defense, defense, defense.
Yep.
How are we going to defend this year?
That's a great question, because I think as a former player of mine, you know that our philosophy has always been, if you don't guard, you don't play.
Right.
And there's no doubt that I would prefer to play man. We'd prefer to be more on the line and really pressuring people, but I don't think this team is built that way. I think you can be a good man team without having to play a ton of real pressure defense. And because we're long, we have to just rely more on that ability to close out, that ability to create problems for people by utilizing our length before the ball's on the floor, by being smart about moving on every pass, knowing that we're not going to be that team that can come out and really contest a lot of great dribblers and quick kids. So I think we can defend solidly. We're just going to have to do it in more of a pack line philosophy this year. Yep. But I think that's okay too, as long as we realize that we have to do our job before our guy gets the ball, and we just have to once again utilize that length and that strength of ours, and that's being able to cause some problems by not being quicker, but just being hopefully a little bit smarter than our opponent on that end, and also just utilizing that ability to be longer than the guy we're guarding.
Right. You've mentioned a name when we're talking about your top 7 or 8, kind of in passing. Cal Smith, senior, offensive player of the year in the football team, committed to play baseball at Duluth. Overall, a very good athlete, very competitive kid. Obviously, had a really good fall, hurt, played through it. I just heard today that Cal was going to play. I know we had talked previously about Cal kind of being on the fence, off the fence. What does, not necessarily even Cal, but when you bring someone that's had so much high school athletic success, that's now a senior, who hasn't played for a little bit, back into the fold, what does that bring to the team?
I think it's just that attitude of winning breeds winning, and whether you are successful in the fall in the football field or in the spring in the baseball field or what have you, I think when players around you know that you've been able to get it done in big time high school situations, and Cal was in many of those this past fall and in the spring, I think that just lends some confidence to our guys that don't have as much experience athletically as he does. So our hope is that, like our other football players, Ryan Edendall still battling a little bit of a hip injury. Right. Colin has the shoulder injury, Cal with his ankle. So, those guys have been through the gauntlet, and so when they get healthy, I think our team will take another step. But I just like the fact that that senior crew of 6 solid players and really good athletes and really good kids, it just has a trickle-down effect. And there's no doubt that as a senior leader on the football team, Cal established himself as a leader out there. And one of the nice things I think for Cal is he doesn't have to assume that same role of our basketball team, right. But he's going to be looked to just like all the other seniors will be looked to create some positive energy for us. And I think back to when I first started coaching, and some of the coaches in the area that were successful had always talked about, there's nothing like having seniors, and I couldn't agree with that more. If you can play, you can play. Right. But when you put 12th graders on the floor with a lot of experience and just have been through the grind together in other sports, I think that bodes well for our team.
Absolutely. So let's kind of take a step away from Baldwin Woodville, look at the middle border. So the middle border last year was really good. Had some really, really good graduating seniors. We had 3 that were very, very good that I mentioned, all conference players, amongst a number of other seniors that we had graduated. Prescott loses Jordan Malmov, who I think was Offensive Coal Player of the Year.
Yeah.
With Braden Bradway, who was on a really, really good Osceola team. So we've taken a lot of really good players out of the equation. And those, I believe, I mean, looking at last year's standings, we now have, in my opinion, an opening at the top, right? Dallas Wallen's still back at Prescott. The Wallen brothers are going to be at Amory, and they're, I mean, they didn't win a game last year, but they were very young. Carter's going to be a junior. The younger one's coming in to be a freshman, who I assume would start. We'll see them later this week. As a basketball fan, I'm excited about watching that team play.
That'll be a fun night.
But I didn't even look at the yearbook. How do coaches think that this year is going to play out in the conference? Like, who are the teams to beat? Like, I'm assuming you got to see that preview. You sent stuff in.
Yeah. When I think about our league right now, whether it's football, basketball, wrestling, baseball, I really believe that our conference is starting to shape up as if not the best Division III conference in our state, from top to bottom and everything. One of the best. Perennially football is represented by our conference, deep in the playoffs. You've had Prescott that has kind of put the middle border on the map a little bit when it comes to state basketball. I just think that from top to bottom, our league is really good. This year, no exception. When you look at the yearbook, the teams that the coaches in our area and our conference have picked to be towards the top are Prescott, Somerset, Central, us. Not necessarily in that order, but I think that's pretty legitimate. I also feel that, as you just alluded to, you better not sleep on Amory, because they have a kid that I don't know if there's a more athletic player in Western Wisconsin. He's explosive, he can score, and he's that kid that can play with essentially no conscience. He just lets it happen. He's inherited a younger brother on his team that's a talented kid. I think Osceola, even though they lost some folks, I think Howard does a great job up there.
And there's a younger Bradway.
And they had a solid JV, well coached. Central has probably the best collection of just, lateral athletes in our conference. Prescott brings back a kid that's a college prospect.
Right.
So there's just not any nights off. And very similar, I think, to how it shapes up in other sports for the most part. And I just know that night in and night out, our league is going to be a dogfight. And I would anticipate that our conference champion could have 2 or 3 losses.
Right.
In fact, it's probably likely.
Well, and you mentioned Somerset, and I didn't mention Somerset, but Dylan Lesha.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw what he does on the football field. He just goes up and gets it. Mm-hmm. We saw some of that on the hardwood last year. Ellsworth has the roll kid that's really long. He's, I think, only a sophomore this year. You didn't mention Altoona, who they were down last year, but they always seem to just kind of find more dudes.
Yeah.
And I think you're right on. Like, this conference. I mean, we ran into West Salem 2 years ago, who was they were kind of a buzzsaw. The year before, Central made it.
Yep.
Right.
The COVID year. Yep.
And then last year, Osceola lost to West Salem. Yeah. So I mean West Salem now, they lose Lados, they lose Kepnick. They bring back Henderson and Kennedy.
Yeah, and looking at West Salem's run the last few years in our section, there's no doubt that it would have taken for us 2 years ago probably a perfect basketball game to beat them. In fact, I'm still very proud of how we competed against them in a very difficult game in a big environment.
Absolutely.
Same last year, Osceola hung around for a while and they just once again had to play perfect.
Yep.
I really sincerely believe this year that the state representative in this section will come from our conference. I know that's a pretty bold statement to make in November, but when I look at the strength of our league, plus the fact that West Salem now moved up to Division II.
Perfect.
And I do think that our half of the section has been, with the exception of West Salem, has been significantly stronger than their half.
Right.
And I think that's true this year as well. So I really believe down the road, the state tournament rep from our section is likely to come out of our league.
So, I mean, I haven't even looked, and I didn't anticipate talking about this, but when you look at the Southern, I'd assume GET's got to be the team, right?
Yeah, I would say based on what we saw last year, we played them in the holiday tournament, and probably have the most prolific scorer in this whole half of the state. But there's just not a whole lot down there, I think, to challenge them, unless someone emerges that maybe we're not real aware of. But I think they're likely to be a team that will emerge from that section or that half. But I also think that Elk Mound is going to be a quality team before it's all said and done. We saw them twice this summer. We scrimmaged them. We're going to play them this year. They're a little bit like us. They're big, not overly gifted from the perimeter, but well coached, and they're going to run that 1-3-1. And it could be interesting because you could have a GT Elk Mound matchup with a battle of 1-3-1s at some point in the tournament. But and I know, like you said, that's a ways down the line, but I guess the older I get and the more experience I have as a coach, the earlier I started thinking about the tournament.
Absolutely.
That's what we live for in this game. So.
Well, and I think just being a basketball fan, like Cody Schmitz 25 years ago before the internet, he's probably not, I mean, you know about him, right? But when the internet and Twitter and social media, like this was a kid that I'd heard about in middle school, right? And the Jordan Malmovs of the world and the Petey Brookshaws of the world, like social media has become such this big thing that you know who kids are way before it even seems like you should. One thing I like to do at the end of Kiefer's Corners every week is to just kind of give Coach Kiefer kind of the chance to talk about other football that intrigued him, right? Huge basketball fan. What other, whether it's the high school level, the college level, the professional level, what are you kind of watching nowadays? Well, what's intriguing you as a basketball fan?
That's an interesting question because one of the beautiful things about Thanksgiving break is the ability to watch as much sports as you want.
Right.
And having watched a ton of college football over the last weekend, but also a lot of college basketball. What struck me about the college basketball games that I watched in the last 5 days, 6 days, was even though, and I think I said this a little bit earlier, even though the 3-point line has changed the game, there's no doubt about it. What struck me is there was some big time matchups, particularly like Marquette beating Kansas.
For sure.
Where Marquette commanded the paint and had like a 20-point advantage in the paint. And I think what's happening is, basketball, like all sports, there's ebbs and flows with respect to, styles and philosophies. And I remember not too long ago when Adams Friendship had a ton of success playing 1-3-1 and kind of I wouldn't say hold the ball.
They held the ball.
Well, they held the ball. But being very deliberate.
Right.
But, as people learned how to how to attack that 1-3-1, then things kind of change. And then, 5-out dribble drive became, just the game for a while. Now I think you're seeing a little more balance between the great perimeter shooting, but realizing that, especially at the college level, there's so much length, and defenders are so athletic that you can guard 5 dribblers a little more effectively now than when that became the rage.
Right.
But if you get the Zach Eady's of the world.
And there aren't many of those.
And they're not many, but there's just so many good big bodies that are now kind of rediscovering how to play in the lane. Yep. And I guess I took some pleasure out of watching that because I still believe in a high school system where you don't have basketball specialists trying to be a 5-out dribble drive team. I don't think that plays into our skill set.
Right.
And one of the things that we've tried to do as a coaching staff is we're not going to play the way we watch guys on TV play. We're going to play the way we can be most successful. And for us, that is trying to be better in the paint than most of our opponents. And, seeing more of that now in the college game, as we know, things usually trickle down. And so maybe we'll see a bit more post-play becoming a little bit of a priority.
Do you think part of that is because, 15 years ago, you knew who the guys that were capable of making 3-point shots were, right? Maybe the team had 2 of those guys. Maybe the team had 3 of those guys. But when you turn on college basketball especially, they can all make threes, right? In the pros, they can almost all make threes.
Yeah.
And in the high school level, and maybe less so at the high school level, but the shooting is more of an equal thing now, where it's like you're not going to walk into a gym and be like, okay, this isn't fair because this team is so much better on the perimeter than that team, because everybody will take them, right?
Yep.
But I watched Braden Bradway in this gym last year. He just kept backing up and knocking shots down. But we had guys.
We also forgot to guard him, I think, last year.
There was some possessions where that was questionable, but we also had guys that could knock down shots, right? And so it's like the 6-point lead isn't that great of a lead anymore because one guy knocks down 2 shots. Like I think James Borkhardt is fully capable of just going on a
Absolutely.
heater and hitting 4 threes in a row.
Jeremy Jacobson, same way.
Right. And it's like we have this guy that can do it, this guy that can do it, this guy can do it. And I don't think that's atypical anymore.
No.
Where a long time ago, it's like, yeah, we have that guy, he's a shooter, that guy, he's a shooter, but then the other guys, their range is 15 feet, 16 feet.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's like, maybe they don't shoot 40%, but they're capable of knocking down a shot.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's got to try to defend the perimeter, which in turn then opens up.
Yeah.
Where how are you gonna go triple Zach Edey, or are you gonna leave 2 shooters open?
Yeah. I think when I think about how watching basketball change, and it's changed at all 3 levels. I still think Steph Curry has changed the game more than anybody in the last 2-3 decades.
For sure.
But when I think about like myself as a young player, when we were growing up, we used to love to spin it out and play in the post, even though we weren't post players, because there were so many good post players, playing in the professional ranks at that time. But what I've learned now, what I think our guys are figuring out is there aren't many kids that are good post defenders because they never have to do it.
Right.
And so for us, we're maybe a little traditional, a little old school, but we're trying to stress defenses and emphasize the fact that it doesn't matter if you are a 1 guy or you're a 5 guy in our scheme of things. If we can get you the ball in that scoring area, and you can become somewhat adept at either getting that shot off, getting the free throw line, that plays into our hands. So but I guess back to your question, that's what intrigued me most about watching college basketball over the break was just a little bit of that return to some good old-fashioned post play. And I think that down the line, that could be extremely helpful for a team like us, who I think our shooting will get better. But as you said, we do have some guys that can get on a roll. But if you have to guard a CNN out, that makes a difference. So,
and maybe turning on the NBA game and watching the best player in the NBA right now that's 6'10" with a 3-inch vertical that doesn't look like an athlete.
Yeah.
Maybe that's giving other people hope.
I hope so, because you're right. When you can shoot the runners and both hands and make it look easy.
Yep.
I do think there is a place for being real savvy as a player, and we don't have any of those guys at 6'10" right now.
Right.
But I think we have some kids. For example, a guy like Colin Frick, who plays like a 30-year-old.
Yep.
And I think he's a guy that in our league and in our division is going to be very, very difficult to defend because he just has that knack for scoring and finding guys that are open.
Well, I mean, I've sat, and you've watched it too. You've watched it more than I have. Colin getting the ball in the block, somehow using his pivot foot to get his defender on the other side of him, and then making a layup.
Yeah.
Like who?
He just has such great patience down there, and that's probably been the one thing early in practice with our other guys that we're struggling with the most is, because some of our guys aren't real accustomed to playing in there. All of a sudden they find themselves with the ball in some space, and everything's they speed things up, and Colin just has the ability to just keep his poise, find his defender, and just all of a sudden he's either got a layup or a reverse layup or kicking it to someone that's open, and I think he's going to do some really big things in the post and just be fun to watch down there, because I do think there's a place for that in modern basketball.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, this was Coach Benoy. I'm Jeremy Nygaard. This was Benoy's Breakdown, episode 1. Home game tomorrow against Turtle Lake, Tuesday night. And then home game on Friday against Amory. That'll be a conference opener. And then we'll kind of look at next week's schedule and see when we can get together and do this again. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. So long.